Yes, welcome in. We're back. So last time we talked, Jesse, was, well, I should say, obviously we did the swing yesterday. If you've missed it, go find it on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. But the first time we've talked about football, it's just a guarantee, absolute guarantee that news is going to break almost every time we do a pod. We do a pod. Sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller. This time it was huge. Phil Longo out as Wisconsin's offensive coordinator. We're going to dive into all of it, mainly focusing on Luke Fickell and what he had to say and what he didn't have to say. So we're gonna get into all that. But I just initially, were you surprised at the timing?
Yes, definitely surprised at the timing. Not surprised that this ended up happening. It's been headed in this direction for a long, long time. When we're having these kinds of conversations for weeks on end, then you know that Luke and whoever he's talking to are having similar conversations. And one of the reasons I'm surprised is, and I put this in my story, I go back to 7 weeks earlier, the day after Purdue coach Ryan Walters fired Graham Harrell, his offensive coordinator. And Luke said he didn't want to speculate on what happened because it was another team. But one nugget that he offered that I think hinted at his feelings was that he felt it was a bad part of the game. And I took away that, okay, this is something he would not want to do in the middle of the season. And he ended up doing it. Now, he said at the outset that he never, ever anticipated having to do this, and certainly during the season, but he's also doing it because he believed the timing was right to try to move the program forward. And frankly, I think it's to try and figure out who's going to be in there next at a very critical inflection point for the program.
I think it's pretty clear that he's got an idea of who that next person is going to be. But because you don't make the move without having your next one in. We're going to get into all of it. I'll play a little overreaction or no as well before we do. As always, the camp is the official apparel sponsor of the camp is Home Field Apparel. They have unmatched vintage gear in the college game. You can find all their stuff at homefieldapparel.com. Getting close to holiday season, ton of new Badger gear here over the last few months, and they've also got every other school you could possibly think of. And I could go into detail about a few of them that I like. Again, there's just a ton of. I'm a vintage guy. I don't know about you. I love like the vintage looking stuff, like the old school Bucky. Like that's where I'm at. So go check them out. Homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. Okay. Luke Fickell's press conference. You said it was feisty. I didn't want to put that on the board here, but I would absolutely agree with that. And maybe we can get into this later. We should probably talk about what he says as opposed to his demeanor during said press conference. But I don't recall him being like that. Like there are times where he'll call somebody out and be like, "And what were those numbers?" But like it felt like yesterday was a lot of anytime anybody asked a question about the offensive coordinators, like we have to worry about Nebraska, and like, well, dude, you just fired your offensive coordinator the day before. We have to talk about this. That's what we're going to talk about. But we'll save that for later. The actual answers, namely, his reasoning behind doing this was because he feels it gives them the best chance the next two games, right? That things have gotten so. I shouldn't say so bad. Things have gotten to the point where he felt that they needed to make this move. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, why he believes things got to this point to have to make this move.
Well, first of all, will I be stealing an overreaction or no by talking at least in part about the demeanor? Because I think both of them are extremely important.
You will not be.
I don't want to step on the toes, but I want to say at the outset that
you are a co-host, so you can do what you want.
I'm going to answer that question, but I think my biggest takeaway from all of this is the tenor and tone of that press conference struck me as something I've never seen before in 2 years since Luke got here. And feisty is certainly a word that I used for it. It was combative, it was defensive, and I just was really surprised in part because yeah, he wanted to talk about Nebraska. It's a big game, no question about it. 2 5-5 teams that are fighting for bowl eligibility, but you can't control what the press asks during a press conference unless you straight up shut it down and say, I refuse to talk about it. And that's not what he did. And I just don't know what he expected the conversation to be like when his weekly press conference comes one day after you made a decision to fire the offensive coordinator in, frankly, the biggest coaching move that you've made since you brought everybody in. Yeah, I know you fired the offensive line coach or reassigned him, whatever the semantics are behind that. This is the freaking offensive coordinator. And so I was just very surprised. I understand a lot of it probably comes from a place of frustration because he's not happy with the results. And he probably feels like the decision's already made. Why do I have to continue to address it? But I just want to say that at the outset, I was very surprised by the way that he chose to handle a lot of these questions when you had to know that this was going to be 90% of what was asked.
All right. So since I guess we're doing this, I got a couple of messages, DMs, wondering if it bothers you.
Me as a reporter?
Bothers us. That like that. And I know we shouldn't turn the story on us, but that, it is what it is. Like, he's never normally like that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that I'm upset about it. I feel like there are some people that are upset about it. It was a horrible look. Like, I'll say, I totally agree with that. And it was just a really, really bad look. And it felt like a little unaware of the situation that he was in. But it's not like I'm upset about how he did things. Now, if that was the same way every single press conference that we had, that might be different. Then again, I kind of like that stuff. So I kind of enjoyed the arguing and the going back and forth and kind of, if someone's going to be like that to me, I would love to go back at that. But like, that's just for the first time. That's not how he's been.
I'm not upset about it. And I think there's certainly a distinction that needs to be made. He didn't make any of those responses personal. That's a different type of situation. I understand he's coming from a place of frustration. Again, I was a little surprised at how he perhaps chose to handle some of those questions. And for people who watch it, they obviously know how it went, but there were a couple questions toward the end that started to talk about non-offensive coordinator related things, a question about Xavier Lucas, a question about the defensive line rotation. And then you asked a question that was about whether he would have any hesitation in the future in hiring someone that he did not directly work with. And the first thing he said is, "Oh, we're back to square one." But that's not making it personal. It's just sort of a real window into how he was feeling in that moment. So I think I just want to make it clear, like, it wasn't personal. I'm not upset, but I am surprised at how he chose to handle a lot of those questions, particularly considering what the conversation was clearly going to be like a day after you made this move.
Do you think it was intentional for me to hold on to that question until later in the press conference?
No, I think it was just the way that it happened, but you tell me.
I guess we'll have to take it however we take it.
Sure. And he's free to answer. This is the other thing. Like, he did his job. It was a press conference. He answered the questions or didn't answer the questions. Like, he didn't do anything wrong per se. It's just the way that it came across. And there were some answers that I don't agree with how he chose to answer. But I mean, that's different between, like, he did something wrong. Like, he can do that. He can do what he wants to do. I just don't necessarily agree with how some of those were answered.
I mean, he can absolutely do whatever he wants to do. That doesn't mean that it was the right thing to do or the way that he handled it was the right way to handle it. It was weird. Like, again, you just fired the highest paid staff member that you have, an offensive coordinator that you were so jacked about bringing in and working with, and you had him come in and overhaul something that had been in place for how long. You fire him. Like, maybe there should have been a press conference Sunday where you ask all the questions about the offensive coordinator, and then there's nothing to ask Monday. I don't know. Maybe that would have been better, but to expect anything other than what actually happened is probably a little bit, I don't want to say naive, but maybe naive on his part that was not going to be the questions. But that said, now that we're 10 minutes into this, let's get into some of the answers that he actually had. And I think it probably starts not necessarily with the decision, but with who's going to be taking over. And you have reported, and I think the Wisconsin State Journal and Colton has reported that Nate Letton is going to be calling plays, right? So that is what it's going to be. Okay, so you don't want to tell us who it is. Why not? You're trying to protect them. It's already been reported who it's going to be.
Yeah, this was probably the most surprising answer.
Yeah, like, can we? You've made the decision to move on from Phil Longo. You're going to put somebody else in his place. Why is he better for these final 2 games as opposed to Phil Longo? Like, why? And to his answer, why does it matter?
Yeah. So that was the first thing that he said. I think it was probably the most combative exchange, though there were certainly a couple. And he said that it would be a collaborative effort. And his rationale for not explaining it is, and I want to make sure I don't misquote him, which is why I have my story pulled up, because there's a couple things I wanted to address. But he talked about he didn't want to give people the ability to point a finger at somebody, even though you just fired your offensive coordinator. And frankly, if you didn't know and it hadn't been reported, you're going to know on Saturday. You think it's not something that people on TV are going to talk about, or they're going to show someone on the headset or whatever it may be. I just thought it was a kind of a strange answer. Now, he later went back to his rationale, and I can at least understand in part where he's coming from when he said when he was the co-defensive coordinator at Ohio State, there were stretches where, and he didn't want to get into specifics, but he was the one calling the plays. And he would consistently be asked, as were others, who's calling the plays. And it was like, oh, I don't know. And they were playing coy and okay, whatever. But it does matter. And maybe you think it doesn't matter because there's only 2 games left and someone else is going to be doing it after the fact. But as far as what I've been told, yeah, Nate Letton is going to be calling the plays. He's in his 3rd year as a full-time coach at the college level, his 2nd year at Wisconsin. And Kenny Guyton is also going to have a hand in this, because my understanding is he's going to be the one signaling in the plays. And also, from what I've been told, that we may see more huddling between plays so that there's perhaps less confusion at the line of scrimmage. Now, that remains to be seen. It's not like they're going to massively overhaul what you're doing, because how can you possibly do that? But Phil obviously was not only responsible for calling the plays, but he's kind of calling them at the same time as he's signaling them in. I think that's a lot to ask of whoever is remaining on the staff, because there is no significant play calling experience. Obviously, Nate, certainly at the college level, has never done it. Now, Kenny Guyton does have 4 games as the interim offensive coordinator last year at Arkansas. And one thing Fickell did divulge is that Guyton is going to be working with the quarterbacks and with the wide receivers, so they'll be together. But that is the plan. And if you don't want to divulge it Monday because you think there's some competitive advantage to be had, everybody's going to know in a few days. So I was definitely surprised by that response. And I just, it does matter, at least to some degree. Yeah.
I mean, you're paying a guy $1.2 million to be your offensive coordinator / play caller. I mean, if it doesn't matter, why are you paying him so much? Why are you going to be paying the next guy as much as you're going to be paying him? Is it just to install the system and just, hey, let the system run? And I know he was like, one guy shouldn't make a difference, but he also then went and said it felt like one guy was, a little bit away from everybody else, and that was not working together. I thought that was, there were certainly things within the press conference that were like, okay, now, this makes even more sense. I think we were both on the same page. Well, maybe we weren't. I have been on the train that this was done back in September, especially after the "I'm here to please Coach Fickell" comment. Like, from that day, this date, this was inevitable. I assume you kind of felt the same way, that potentially, unless something just drastically different happened, that this was going to be the way it goes, because it felt like even last year they were butting heads exactly on what the offense should look like. And then certainly this year with some of the different personnel packages and how that stuff was working, that Luke Fickell was having, maybe not pressing his thumb down on the offense a little bit, but just having a little bit more of a role. But yes, the idea that one guy making this big of a difference, that shouldn't be the way it is. And it shouldn't be that way that is moving forward either.
Yeah, so I did think it was heading this direction, but I can't say that I knew when it was going to happen. And honestly, while it seemed like inevitable that would happen in year 2, there was a part of me, and I mentioned this on the show the last time we did it on Sunday, that wondered, is there some kind of grace period where Luke is looking at this and thinking, and that's why it was the first question that I asked him, did you give any consideration to retaining him simply because the backup quarterback has either started or played meaningful snaps in 12 or 23 games. Yes, that was one of Phil Longo's handpicked guys. And yes, he praised him a lot, but like they didn't go into either season with the plan for him to be the guy. And he said that had nothing to do with it. And I thought that was another interesting response where he said, I'll give you the gist of what I told the players is that it had nothing to do with touchdowns and scoring points. And I mean, it was obviously a philosophical difference, but like if you score more touchdowns and get more points, you're not in this spot. But to your previous point, unless you wanted to say something, I don't want to,
No, the only thing I was gonna say is like it just felt like they were never on exactly the same page as to what
yes
they wanted the offense to look like, and he kind of admitted that when I asked my question. He kind of admitted it later on, right?
Yeah.
Like he said, that next guy has to be adaptable and has to be flexible, and that is the most important thing, being on the same page.
Yep.
He said it. I didn't ask if they were on the same page. I did that earlier this year and asked if they were on the same page, and he said yes. They clearly weren't. They clearly weren't.
Yes. To
But
me, the most telling, to me, and you touched on this before, the most telling thing that he said, actually, I asked him this question. It wasn't even about necessarily Phil. It was a question about team morale. And I said, do you worry about team morale when they've had to get up for all these big games, haven't won any of them, and now they're dealing with this? So it wasn't like specifically related to Phil, but this is what he said. And I don't want to misquote him because I think it's important. He said, I think maybe that was one of those issues that was not as good as where we wanted it offensively, that it was more about an individual. And he said, like Wisconsin football, it's about complementary ball and relying on everybody. And this to me, I mean, if I'm Phil, I'm probably not paying attention to any of this, or I'm trying not to. But I felt like this was the biggest slap in the face to whatever Phil was trying to do here for 2 years. He said, it's hard to say, well, they're the coordinator. I hope that it wouldn't be that much different if somebody else was calling the plays on offense or on defense. That's my vision for what I want the program to grow. It is, because you're responsible for calling the offense. And so if you hope that it wouldn't be that much different, then why don't you just hire anybody? I just thought that was interesting. But the first part that he said about it being less about an individual makes me think that was his biggest beef with Longo, was what you're saying. There wasn't flexibility. It was kind of all about Phil, as whether it was my way or the highway, and it was his system. And clearly Luke wanted to do something different. We heard plenty of times about how he wanted to lean more on the offensive line in the run game. And it's not that Phil was opposed to running the ball. They certainly ran it, but they were not on the same page. That's been evident for a long, long time. And even if he was going to run the ball, he was still going to pass. They couldn't marry the concepts together. And I'll be interested to see whoever it is that he hires next, because you want to give that person who's making $1 million plus autonomy to run the system. And it does matter who's calling the plays. But I sort of understand part of the concept that you want it to be about the team. But like, I just don't fully embrace that idea of like, if you're calling the plays, you're the one calling the plays. It's your system to some regard.
Yeah, there have been some other things here that probably need to clean up. There have been some people suggesting that Chris McIntosh had a role in this, that Fickell was feisty, or however you want to describe him, because he was forced to do that, forced to make this move. I would push back against that pretty considerably, because all the signs were there that this was coming. It wasn't like, oh my God, they had to delay a game coming out of a kickoff and this is it. Like, no, this was something that was well on its way to happening. The fact that it happened now is obviously just the biggest difference. But I don't think McIntosh had a role in this at all.
Neither do I. I think Luke would have done this sooner if he could have somehow done it. I don't know.
Right. Like, if they weren't playing number 1 Oregon, maybe you do it during the bye week.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know, but that may have made more sense just because it gives them another little bit of, it gives them a little bit more time to get ready, as opposed to 6 days like this. But
I think it's convenient timing too. What happens if Braedyn's left-handed touchdown pass is good? Joe Huber's not down there past the line of scrimmage, and they win the game. You can't fire the offensive coordinator after you beat the number 1 team in the country, even if it's like 19-16.
I mean, you can, but you probably won't.
No, you probably won't.
Right. Again, this sounded, he said it felt like, didn't he say, I hadn't made up my mind after Saturday night, but then Sunday after talking with Phil, then it was, that was kind of the way it goes. This isn't exactly a McIntosh Chris situation, right? Like it feels like this was kind of always the way that Fickell was going to end up going, and just that conversation maybe pushed it over the edge, as opposed to that was not the plan, maybe necessarily going into his. I'm talking about McIntosh and Chris, maybe not necessarily his exact plan going into that meeting, and it just turned out to be that way.
At this point, this is obviously just my perspective on it. I'm not inside the room with everybody, but this is Luke's program, and he's the one who's got full autonomy to make these decisions. This is why you brought him in and are paying him what you're paying him. Luke's not happy. No one's happy. They're 12-11 since the start of last season, 8-8 in Big Ten play, and he showed last year that he's willing to make changes and firing the offensive line coach and bringing somebody in who, in AJ Blazek, by all accounts, has been pretty good. Certainly with the enthusiasm, with the recruiting, and it's a much bigger deal now. But here's the other thing: you better get this one right. You better get it right.
And he said, "We will get the right one," didn't he? That was like the end. That was the end of the answer to my question.
Yep.
What exactly was it?
How he put it?
Yeah. Do you remember off the top? I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah,
it was just
here. It's right at the end of my story because it was kind of the most important thing that he said. But he said,
"You're welcome."
Yeah, he said, "I can tell you this: it'll be the right one, the right person." And I ended my story with Fickell can't afford for it not to be, because he ain't gonna be around if you fail a second time.
Are you confident? Are you as confident in him as he is in himself?
Luke?
Yeah. To make this hire right? To make this the right hire?
Yes, because I think, I mean, look, I don't know whether whoever he hires is going to work out, but I think Luke, 2 years in, has a better understanding of what needs to happen here. And obviously the shift away from what they were doing before was very drastic with a system that just didn't seem to fit the players. But he also said he likes some of the things they're doing, and they're not going to go back to 22 personnel. So I think it strikes me as you're going to have a power spread. You're still going to have a lot of this kind of stuff, but I do think that he understands how important this hire is. Because like I said before, if you fail a second time with the hiring of your offensive coordinator, you're not going to be around. That's just the reality of it. You know, maybe the guy gets 2 years, and if it's still bad in year 4, you got problems as the head coach. So I have confidence, I suppose, that he'll find a better fit, but that doesn't mean that I think it's going to turn Wisconsin into something that is a championship contender.
Is this a huge hire for Chris McIntosh too?
Yeah, because, and whether Chris wants to admit it or not, I think we can all see when you make this kind of decision, you fire a coach at midseason for the first time in the history of the football program, and then you do this, you bring Luke in, your success is tied to his success. Now, somebody else has to make that decision on the long-term viability of an athletic director, but very clearly, this is the engine that pulls along the whole athletic department, and it matters significantly. So certainly, whatever success Luke has or failure is tied to the athletic director, because he's the one who ultimately made this decision. And when I talked to Chris at Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis, he said that he certainly accepts the responsibility that comes with that decision. He knows it was a big move.
He also said that people will see how big of a improvement the football team is. You should see how they're working behind the scenes.
He did say that.
Still waiting for it.
Yep.
All right, let's play a little overreaction or no. Luke Fickell should be fired for allowing Braedyn Locke to still be the starting quarterback this Saturday. Is that an overreaction or no?
Oh, I think it's the easiest overreaction we're going to have here. And I know people are upset, certainly about that quote, that there's never a doubt that Braedyn's going to be the guy, but it goes back to what Phil Longo said. And we haven't seen the practices in 3 months. If maybe we're close, maybe Matire would be playing. And right now he's not. He's a true freshman who's still learning, and he's played 16 total snaps. Maybe we'd see him at some point in the bowl game or something, but at this point, it doesn't feel like that's a realistic possibility. So I can't sit here and say like I'm just so upset or infuriated by the decision of the coaching staff. And I understand that people say, oh, how could it be any worse? But it could be. It certainly could be. And they feel like Braedyn still gives them the best chance to win. And I think we can all acknowledge that that quarterback play with Braedyn in there is not good enough, but it's still the best Wisconsin has right now with the healthy quarterbacks available.
So I thought it was interesting. Another thing of what Luke Fickell said yesterday, towards the end of I don't remember which question it was, but it kind of gave me the idea that he doesn't feel like the offense and the way that Phil was running it was best utilizing the personnel that he had. And so at the end of his quote, or one of his quotes, he said, "We're going to give Braedyn a better opportunity to grow." He didn't say grow, but I mean, grow and improve. Like we're going to give him a better opportunity. In other words, the person who was doing this before was not giving him an opportunity to have success at the level that we think he can have success at. Whether you agree with that or not, and I'm very clear as to where I'm at, I have to at least acknowledge that that's kind of where his mind is at with this. So, yes, Mabry is not obviously ready. Also, and again, I don't know whether this plays a fact or plays a role whatsoever. He has already played in 3 games. And one, if he plays on Saturday, that's 4, and he can't play another one if he wants to hold on to his red shirt. Obviously, he can play in the bowl game. And if we're being completely honest, I think if they were to make it to a bowl game, I think there's probably a pretty good chance that he will play in the bowl game, because I don't know that Braedyn Locke. Well, again, we're getting way out in front of this, but when that transfer portal opens, it feels like it's going to be there's going to be quite a few names in it, and I would think, again, we'll see what the offensive coordinator. I'm getting way ahead of myself, but I've already said I didn't think Longo was going to be here next year, and I didn't think Braedyn Locke was going to be here next year. One's gone. I think the other one is probably going to be on its way out as well, but we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, I think Mabry, we could see Mabry in the bowl game, kind of like we saw Chase Wolf in the bowl game, where the starting quarterback is gone and you need someone to fill in, and it doesn't count against his red shirt. So play, right?
It's a new landscape. And so I definitely think we're going to see that more and more, especially at the quarterback position. And I would say, Luke said, what does it matter about who needs to know who's calling the plays other than the guys in the room? I kind of feel that way about who's playing quarterback in the bowl game. What does it matter? Honestly, at this point, I think people need to see what Mabry can do. And I think the coaching staff needs to see it. Luke said it himself earlier this season. You can't know what a quarterback has until you see him in games. And he's a guy that was brought in here again, remains to be seen what the quarterback room looks like, but certainly it feels like would be in a decent spot if he can continue to progress to be in the mix to play. But you need to know what he can do. I think for Wisconsin, it's way more important as a program to get to a bowl game than to whatever happens in the actual bowl game. I know that bowl, getting to a bowl, is a massive deal to these guys. Even if morale may not be great, and even if the season hasn't gone the way that it is, they still reached bowl games for 22 consecutive seasons. It's the 3rd longest active streak in the country. And I certainly don't think any of these old guys who are on their way out want to be a part of the team that ruined that streak. Even if it's not playing for a Rose Bowl or a Big Ten championship, it still matters. So I think, yeah, they just got to get to a bowl game. But from there, evaluating the future isn't the worst thing in the world.
I don't disagree with the older guys things, but how many of those guys are actually going to end up playing
in the bowl?
Right?
Guaranteed.
Like we're at that too, right? We're at the point where I guess maybe getting to the bowl is the bigger accomplishment than
it is
the bowl itself. But if you lose your last 5 games and still get into a bowl, did you accomplish something? Which is where I'm going with this next overreaction or no. It's a fireable offense to lose 5 straight games to end the season.
Is it a fireable offense? It's not going
for anybody.
Head coach.
For anybody not named Luke Fickell, I think it probably would be.
In year 2?
I mean,
at Wisconsin? I don't think so. But
it depends what you're paying the coach. It depends on how much you owe the coach.
Mm-hmm.
Like Ryan Walters should be out at Purdue, right?
Yeah. Well,
in year 2,
it's a different answer. It may be a fireable offense for some coaches, but it's certainly not going to be for Luke. But certainly not even close, and even bigger disappointment than a year ago. But I think they're going to win one of these. And hell, maybe they'll win both, though there's really no evidence to suggest they will, other than that both these games feel like toss-ups, though Minnesota is better than I thought they were going to be. Nebraska's lost 4 in a row, but they're just as desperate. They're more desperate than Wisconsin, because a bowl game for them is not an annual occurrence. It's been 8 years. but bad look if you go into this. I mean, I don't know if they'll make a bowl game, but if they're 5-7, they are high up there on the APR, academic progress rate. Wouldn't really feel like much of a win to go to Detroit.
It would be Fleckian to do that.
It'd be Fleckian to give him rings or something.
Be Fleckian to go to a bowl game at 5-7.
I would accept it. I would still accept it. It's just like an NIT team. A lot of teams say no, but the extra practice that stuff matters for the young guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, and obviously, Greg Gard said that about the team. What the 22 team
that went to the Final Four.
22-23 team. Yeah, went to the NIT. I mean, it didn't really help him in the tournament last year. I would say that. It didn't help him at all in the second half of the season. But hey, at least they got off to a great start last year and got up to number 6. Do you put that on a banner somewhere? I don't know. Like, what do you do with a top 10 being in the top 10? I don't know.
Nothing.
What's up?
Nothing.
This move by Wisconsin is going to cost them recruits. Is that an overreaction or no?
Oh, not an overreaction. So they have 22 scholarship commits right now, and the early signing period is Wednesday, December 4th. That's when it starts. I don't know. So it's tough because I don't know whether these guys are going to decommit on such a short notice unless they've got a home run situation lined up for them. You know, you can come here and see whether it works or not, which is not an ideal situation. But I certainly think it's going to cost them guys on the current roster and maybe recruits. Well, not maybe in the future beyond this class. I mean, where I'm hesitant is what does it mean specifically for this class because of how close this window is. But we saw 2 years ago, and now that was a little earlier, but when they fired Paul, it was October and they lost a number of guys. It's 2 weeks from now. So that's a real difficult spot, I think, for these recruits to be in.
Well, and what did Fickell say about it? He said, you know, I don't think like this is about what you believe in terms of the program. This is do you believe in what's happening in the program? Because this isn't a head coach leaving. This is an offensive coordinator leaving, right? This is not. So he was asked like, you know, does this, I think it was you that asked, but like, does this give you a little bit of a head start in finding your OC so you can hold on to some of these guys, or does it impact that whatsoever? And he just didn't think that it has that similar impact as a head coach would. And I think that's obvious, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point to make. On the other hand, I just look at what Phil was doing was so unique relative to Wisconsin. How many people came here because of Phil? Now that is not about recruits, but I think when he was here, in part, you're selling a lot of the same things. Oh, we're going to do some things that we haven't done before. On the other hand, I'd like to see the timing of when they name the next offensive coordinator, because that's going to be extremely important to sell to recruits. Okay, it's going to be a little bit different, but like Luke said, we're not going back to under center, pro style, 3 tight ends, whatever it is. And so I think that's going to matter significantly. But it's not. I don't think, as much as in recruiting, and I hear this all the time, oh, commit to the school, not the coach. Well, if you're in a really great spot and you feel confident and comfortable in that university, some people do that. That's not real for 100% of high school kids. They are committing because of the relationships they formed with certain coaches. And so that's why it's so important to figure out who's next, and why I do think there are legitimate questions about whether everybody's going to stick around, because some people just wanted to play in that system for Phil.
They did. I also think like the vibes coming out of last year, you know, you talk to people. We both talk to people. We know that maybe the vibes weren't great. Then you obviously have Braylon coming out and saying, oh, you know, all this. And we could say that was about the program, but I based on what I have heard and like that type of stuff, a lot of it was based on the offensive side of the ball and some of the lack of communication, or maybe some yelling happening during games there was just a lack of continuity, I would say, among the offensive staff and the offense in general, that may have played a role in some of the issues that they've had. And so when you talk about having Phil Longo, yes, there were guys that came to play here. Braedyn Locke is in a very good example of that with the family connection that he established, and certainly his brother committing here as well. But I think there's others that are like, this just, it didn't work. And I think that they thought, they came to play with the idea of this offense, but the offense that they came to play for never really truly materialized.
Right. Yeah, everybody's in a different situation, and some are going to stay because they're committed to the program and just want a spot where they can contribute more or be part of a better team. And a lot of people are going to believe that they can be a part of the better team now that there's someone else. But some are going to feel like, I don't want to be a part of this anymore because I came for a certain reason and now that reason's gone.
Yeah, again, I just don't know what that number is.
No, I have no idea. And again, it's really tricky with the timing of all this in the recruiting class, because for the first time ever, the signing period is now in the first week and not the third week. And I think that's a significant difference. You've cut your amount of time in half. And certainly you can wait until the next signing period. But a lot of these guys have been committed for a long time, and some of them are going to enroll early. And so now you're really in a spot where it does come down to what Luke's talking about. Do you trust in the vision that I have as the head coach for this program? Because if you do, stay on board. On the other hand, I think there's blood in the water, and you're going to have programs that are trying to, if there's someone they deem worthy enough, to poach them.
It's good class. So I think there's obviously guys that you would want to poach. The thing about Phil is, like, what was his job as a recruiter? Quarterbacks, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there's a single quarterback that he's recruited that I would be like, that I would be upset about not being here. Maybe that's unfair. Like, I think that a lot of people have crowned Mabry as the next as the next quarterback, like the future of the program. And I don't know that we saw anything in fall camp. And again, it's not fair. He's a true freshman. He got spring ball, he got fall camp. I don't know that I saw anything in those limited opportunities that would be like, oh yes, well, you should have seen this throw, or you should have seen this decision. I don't think there was anything like that. So I think it's a little bit for me, I would be sitting there saying, yeah, I'm tied to Mabry, and he absolutely has to be here next year. Again, yeah. He was another Phil Longo guy too, right? He came to Wisconsin at least on a visit, but there was no chance he was ever going to come here with the previous staff.
Yeah.
And then when Phil came, it worked out.
Especially with this Carter Smith situation hanging in the balance, which we need to acknowledge if we're going to talk about the quarterbacks. If they end up getting him, and it's Florida State, it's Wisconsin, and okay, that can be your quarterback of the future. There's always going to be another quarterback of the future.
Yeah, exactly. They made over, they made over the room when Phil came in. There's no reason that it wouldn't be made over with the new OC either.
Yeah.
Right? Now it's a little bit different, I would think, but do you feel, again, when you talk about Luke Fickell's vision for this program and the eventual, what it actually ends up being, is your confidence still there that he can do this?
It's not as high, certainly, as it once was. And I look at it again, year 3. Well, it's important. It's extremely important. I don't know how Wisconsin gets to a different level given that schedule. And that may sound like a cop-out or an easy storyline, but it's just the fact. It's just the fact. We said this about year 2. What did we do when we went down the schedule before then? They'd be exactly where they are. And it's hard to see them, whoever comes in, doing that given the competition. And so to me, it comes down to year 4. And you better make it happen. But there's a part of me that wants to say, well, now he's been here for 2 years, so he better understands. And I suppose you couldn't have known until you were here, because it's very clear that he just didn't fully recognize what this place was like and what was needed. It's just hard it's hard to have that optimism and confidence when we've seen this now build up for as long as it has.
Yeah. Well, they do have a game to play. I don't know if Luke said that yesterday or not, but they do have a game to play this Saturday against Nebraska, a team who has lost 9 straight games when in position to claim bowl eligibility. They are 0-9 in their last 9 when they have a chance to clinch a bowl. Got another chance coming up on Saturday. Wisconsin has that chance as well, and if they can't do it, well, then they have to do it against Minnesota next Friday on Black Friday, early kick which I'm sure is just going to be an extremely, extremely well-attended football game at Camp Randall. Looking forward to it, though. Looking forward to it. Always enjoy seeing PJ Fleck. Always enjoy seeing the bright, cheery faces of the Minnesota personnel and the Minnesota folks that come up into the press box, and you ask them how they're doing, and they say elite, and then you want to smack them in the face. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Looking forward to all this. Last 2 weeks, Wisconsin's got 2 more games left to try and get bowl eligible the correct way, as opposed to doing it academically. But we'll see how it plays out. We'll be back Thursday. We'll talk a little bit about that Nebraska game and exactly what the players have to say as they look ahead to doing this without Phil Longo too. We'll have a chance to talk to them tonight. So, Jesse, thank you very much.
As I like to say, Zach, there's always a story, no matter what happens. So there will be more to talk about. Thanks.
Yep. All right. There he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.